Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which coincides with the release of the latest edition of the LPC Rules for Automatic Sprinkler Installations. I'm Simon Bird from the Fire Protection Association, who are the organisation responsible for publishing the document. So the aims of this webinar are to provide background information to the new 2015 editions of both the LPC Rules for Automatic Sprinkler Installations and BSEN 12845, which is the Design, Installation and Maintenance document for automatic sprinkler systems. I intend to highlight and discuss some of the key changes which we are aware of, but I should make you aware that this presentation doesn't purport to be an exhaustive summary of all of the changes, so there is some onus on you guys to find and identify some of the changes yourselves. Copies of the LPC rules are being dispatched this week. Some of you may have received them already, or they will be with you shortly. The intention is to record this webinar and make it available for future use. So if you want to refer to it in the future, it should be possible to do so, and that might be of particular interest to those of you that haven't yet received your copies. So the form of this webinar, we're expecting to run to a maximum of 45 minutes, and as has been explained, questions can be submitted throughout the course of the webinar, and we'll try and respond to a limited number of questions at the end of the session. Otherwise, as is normal, questions, comments and proposals regarding the LPC rules can be put to us at any time via the email address technical@thefpa.co.uk. Just one more point on sort of housekeeping matters. The Chartered Insurance Institute accreditation. So RISCAuthority webinars are now accredited by this institute, and delegates participating in today's and all 2016 webinars can claim the appropriate number of CPD minutes towards the CII and PFS member scheme. So if I may start with a bit of background to remind ourselves what sprinkler protection is all about. So the need for sprinklers arose as the leading economies of the world developed. They improve economic efficiency. Specifically, they reduce consequences and losses from fire. They were originally motivated by the need to protect property, for example, high-value and or large-scale stock and processes, and they've more recently found life safety application. As we don't know when or where a fire will start, sprinkler installations must sit idle for long periods of time before reliably performing their function. This is an extraordinary design challenge in many respects. Development of UK installation rules. So, given the complexity of the undertaking, the outcomes and sprinkler successes we enjoy the benefits of today are only possible with the assistance of robust design and installation standards. This slide provides a very brief summary of some of the incarnations of these design and installation standards. So the FOC, or the Fire Officers Committee, published the first set of installation rules in London in 1888. The LPC, or Loss Prevention Council, later took over this function from the FOC. It's perhaps worth noting that the FOC is often confused with the idea of a Fire Officers Committee, something to do with the Fire and Rescue Service, but actually it was an insurance function, the Fire Officers Committee, and it was really concerned with dealing with, problematic losses from large-scale fires. These rules were the basis of most global standards and evolved ever since their inception. So, for example, some of the more recent additions within our living memories, the FOC 27th, 28th, 29th editions, and then we moved on to BS 5306 Part 2, and there were 1979 and 1990 editions of these, plus, of course, several releases of LPC rules or technical bulletins to accompany the base British Standard documents. And more recently than that, we have BSEN 12845, there was a 2003, a 2009, and now the 2015 edition, all supplemented by technical bulletins forming the complete document of the LPC rules. I suppose really this is all just a very mature example of continuous improvement. So this continuous improvement, combined with the inherent simplicity of the firefighting approach of sprinklers, which is really automatically, uniformly sprinkling water onto a fire, has proven to be a winning formula. So much so that people now constantly seek to emulate sprinkler technology in other forms. Some of the bodies involved today, just to give you background information about why we are where we are with these documents. So despite advocating engineering simplicity as being critical to the success of the sprinkler protection approach, the standards development process has now become somewhat complicated, with multiple parties being involved. CEN, the European Committee for Standardisation, produces EN 12845 by committee, and then in the UK, the British Standards Institution, BSI, produce BS EN 12845. And in practice, currently, what that means is they add a national foreword and a national annex to the document to try and put it in a more sort of UK relevant context. The FPA and RISCAuthority's involvement is firmly wedded to ensuring that the main objective of sprinkler protection is not lost in all of this complexity. The Technical Bulletins continue to serve as the main vehicle by which the FPA and the RISCAuthority ensure sprinkler systems remain highly available, reliable, and maintainable. And finally, just to hopefully clear up a few misconceptions about a couple of acronyms, the LPC Rules is understandably often confused with LPCB. LPC means Loss Prevention Council and relates to the document produced by the FPA, whereas LPCB is a totally separate organisation, stands for the Loss Prevention Certification Board. It's part of the BRE global organisation, and obviously they're involved in the certification of system installations and other activities. So, why the complete reissue of the LPC rules? Well, EN 12845 2015 has been worked on by CEN approximately between the year 2005, possibly even earlier than this, until mid-2011, possibly even later than that, if you count the administration and production processes. It was intended to be an amendment. It contains relatively few changes. However, the amended page count exceeds the limits set by CEN rules. Therefore, it's had to be issued as a full new document. As BSEN 12845 is integral to the LPC rules, this effectively necessitated the full reissue. So this point is not intended to be a political point, but I think it should be understood as background to the document. For the time being, at least, the UK has BSEN 12845 as its main base document for sprinkler system installations. For example, it is referenced in the building regulations. As the European standard exists, there is an obligation upon us to use it, although note that almost no one in Europe, including the UK, uses it without significant alteration. And in practice, some countries don't use it at all. CEN, however, does have its advantages and disadvantages. It recognises the value and role of standardisation in modern society in terms of known outcomes, good for reliability, improved interoperability, good for availability and maintainability. It's a fairly highly regulated standards development framework. It intends to produce robust and good quality standards, and it succeeds some of the time. Obviously, a much bigger debate, culminating in the planned referendum on our European membership, is happening right now about the optimum compromise in terms of benefit afforded by harmonising things in a big group, i.e. Europe, versus the losses in agility and autonomy that seem to be an inevitable part of the package. So, meanwhile, FPA and RISCAuthority produce the LPC rules by improving and supplementing the requirements of BSEN 12845. We take significant technical contributions from the sprinkler industry and the insurers, and our work is based on research and case study experience of real-world events, escape of water, and other failure events and component problems. So all of this can be viewed as a sort of lessons learned or continuous improvement activity. Just as a quick example of research, this slide shows a picture of a research project I was involved with. This is an example of testing we undertook exploring the relationship between the time to open in-rack heads and steel softening due to a rapidly growing fire arising from Class B, a liquid fire. So in this case, the steel in question loses half its structural strength at about 350 degrees Celsius. And the question was, how quickly will the sprinkler system kick in and have a beneficial cooling and protecting effect compared to the steelwork heating up and getting soft? And this research program was a bit of an eye-opener because the scenario it related to, here we have a two-tier racking system shown, but actually the real scenario was much higher than that. So it's a big consequence scenario, and the research found that actually there was only a few seconds difference between the steel reaching this critical temperature and the first head's opening. So we often hear criticisms that sprinkler system design is hugely wasteful in terms of safety margin built in, but actually we found that in this scenario that was not the case at all. So now I'll move into the main body of the presentation, which is talking you through some of the changes. So starting at the beginning, I suppose, BSEN 12845-2015 supersedes BSEN 12845-2004 plus A2 2009, which was to be withdrawn on 31st of December, and that was according to BSI and to CEN. In reality, FPA and RISCAuthority favours a much more realistic transition period, and we think minimum of 3 months needs to be allowed. In the spirit of this, we've included some text in the introduction to the LPC rules. There's an extract on the screen below. Where specified, the LPC rules for automatic sprinkler installations incorporating in 12845 shall be implemented for all contracts let after the 1st of March 2016. Where all stakeholders agree it may be used immediately. We recognise this is still a little challenge, so where this cannot be achieved, the best advice we can give is that agreement must be sought with all the stakeholders concerned. Moving on slightly in the document, the national foreword has been updated to try and clarify matters surrounding changes to terminology, specifically life safety. So the national foreword now reads, it should be noted that this standard no longer uses the term life safety. Elsewhere, Annex F, formerly Special Requirements for Life Safety Systems, is now titled Additional Measures to Improve System Reliability and Availability. Whilst this seeks to clarify, because many people found the concept of life safety in the context of a sprinkler system confusing, because people would say, well, surely all sprinkler systems provide life safety, whereas actually there are subtle, slight design differences, which is the origin of this terminology. But the decision was taken to remove this terminology, and in order to try and clarify the whole situation, it just occurs to us that in the short term, this has the potential to cause confusion. So this is just highlighted to bring the matter to your attention to hopefully reduce the impact of the transition. We don't see this as a technical change. It's just one that might catch people out in terms of terminology. It has meant that elsewhere we've had to try and tidy up terminology and to bridge terms used in other documents. So we have a few examples on the screen here. In our Technical Bulletin TB233, water supplies for life safety systems, as it used to be titled, we've retitled it as water supplies for systems intended to comply with ADB, approved document B. Excuse me. And a couple of other examples on the screen. Note that we tripped ourselves up here, and in production we made a small error that's highlighted on your screen at the bottom left. We retained the words life safety system, which, given that we're trying to clarify, that wasn't particularly helpful, but we've detected the error and it will be corrected in the next reissue of this document. So moving on. The National Annex, which is a new addition to the base document, BSEN 12845. So this has been added. There's arguments for and against adding this to the document. For example, as a positive, it provides an opportunity to improve the document for national application. and that might be helpful to users who are using the text of BSEN 12845 alone, which incidentally we would, for the most part, advise against. As negatives, it is another place where users might have to look to find content. The content is authored by yet another committee, and the content in this annex can only be informative, so it could be considered fairly toothless, perhaps. However, as now published, it gives guidance related to pumps, supplies of water and electricity, and the final point, pump curve stability, is discussed in the next few slides. So, a stable pump curve with a steady declining head is essential for the calculation principles of both BSEN 12845 and the LPC rules. However, the latest CEN publication has done away with this requirement, which used to be stated at Clause 10. To try and illustrate the problem, as we only calculate at the extremities of the design, we're assuming that everything before this point, with fewer heads operating, which we know is what actually happens in most successful sprinkler actuations, is hydraulically at least as good, if not much better. Without a stable curve, this might not be the case at all. So see the pump curves on the screen as examples now. On this slide, we've highlighted in both cases the region which is of interest in the real world most of the time, where 1, 2, 3, or perhaps 4 heads are operating. So that's highlighted by the pink shading. In the case of the unstable curve, the curve on the right-hand side of your screen, which without further definition could be anything in theory, this curve is only an example. The design process and the calculations will have no knowledge of what is happening in this important region. Therefore, we've reinstated or retained this requirement for a stable curve in TB 210. That's on the screen now. We have also reference to material related to UK practice. So again, this is now in the National Annex, and it refers out to TB 209 for ESFR, or Early Suppression Fast Response Sprinkler Protection. It also refers to TB 207, that's for selection of sprinkler head K-factors, and at the request of the Scottish Government, specific guidance or reference to specific guidance on whisky maturation warehouses has also been included. Moving on to a different section of BSEN 12845, a new clause, Clause 21, has been introduced. This could be a big change for the UK. It requires third-party inspection of installed systems every year after they've been installed. So this has potentially interesting regulatory compliance implications. For example, the fire safety order requires that fire safety systems are maintained, and here we apparently have a new requirement in that regard. Insurers' view is that they already undertake their own inspections, and often their inspections are similar to the intent here. However, they don't necessarily want their inspections to be considered as fulfilling this new requirement. Their inspections are done for their own private and commercial purposes, so perhaps it's understandable, but they do not wish to get too involved here. Elsewhere in the document, we have Table 18. This table has been changed and updated to specify a water delivery time limit instead of maximum permissible pipework volumes. Whilst this is difficult to design to, or for that matter, to verify, there is technical merit in the approach. It is the water delivery time which is critical. Practical experience is of some dry systems that it does take several or many minutes for water to be delivered to some locations, and obviously that's a pretty bad state of affairs in terms of fire protection. But in view of the practical difficulty of designing to this, it was a difficult decision for us to decide whether to follow what the BSEN was imposing or carry on as we previously had done in TV 208. However, we've taken the decision that we should follow the BSEN on this point because we think the technical advantage outweighs the disadvantage. We understand there is proprietary software available which can perform the necessary calculations, or alternatively, guidance is provided on volumetric limits which will typically, but not always, meet the requirements. We think that's the best compromise that we can reach in the circumstances. Annex H in BSEN 12845, dealing with sprinkler system monitoring. So Annex H now requires all valves to be monitored, all valves that could stop the flow of water to the installations. This used to be interpreted as being an optional and contractual matter, but it's not worded in a way that allows that interpretation to be applied anymore. So again, I mean, it's possibly desirable. You can see the sense in that requirement, but actually in this case, we've discussed it with the insurers and decided that for a UK setting and for insurance purposes, this is too onerous to insist upon in all cases. TV 232 will address this. There's some wording on the screen below which illustrates this, so it's not a requirement. Consideration should be given. And elsewhere in this document, the importance of consulting with fire insurers on this issue is highlighted. I suppose issues for discussion would include whether there is existing alarm relay equipment on site, the remoteness of the location, the nature of the risk, etc. And now moving on to one of the technical bulletins that we've changed. TB 234 for high hazard storage. This was a significant new technical bulletin introduced in year 2014. It was introduced in response to challenges posed by modern, ultra-large storage and distribution centres. Whilst the introduction of this technical bulletin generally went very smoothly, we did grasp one metal, which was somewhat difficult to implement in a number of situations. Clarifying and enforcing the long-standing requirement that excessive ceiling clearance or clearance to the ceiling above the top of stored goods should be limited to no more than 4 metres. Alternative design solutions were offered, and these included to install in-rack heads, which is fine if there are racks, but if it's an area where there are no racks, then obviously that's not possible. To install a false ceiling, which in many situations wouldn't be attractive, and finally an alternative to consider ESFR protection approach to the affected portions of a building instead. BSEN 12845 2015 also tried to tackle this same problem. There's a new clause 7.2.23, which is on your screen now. This proposes a sort of formulaic approach to increasing density by a certain amount for every metre of excess storage above the 4 metre limit. We have added further text to sort of improve this requirement in TB 234.4.2 commentary and recommendations, and that's because we still don't quite consider the BSEN solution an ideal solution. So here on this slide, which is an extract of the commentary and recommendations, it's only a partial extract, so I would recommend you read all of it, but I'm just bringing your attention to it. Basically, the issue is that the further hot gases have to rise to reach a sprinkler head, the more potential they have to drift horizontally. And this effect is worse once the first head has operated and conditions become a bit more turbulent. So the sprinkler protection approach manages this issue fairly well by using relatively large droplets of water, which are less prone to drifting and disrupting the up-down communication, heat up, water down, that is critical to success. But nevertheless, there are limits to the vertical distance before performance is compromised. Further down in the commentary and recommendations in the same section, we then explain what the likely limits and uncertainty surrounding the newly added design option are. And then later in the CNR, we give a few examples of how to interpret and how to apply the formula. Now, we anticipate that this approach does create a few new complexities, and we would expect to receive some feedback on this. However, on balance, we hope it provides a considerable improvement and another useful design option when all other options have been exhausted. There is no silver bullet here. This is a very difficult design challenge to overcome. Right, now, looking at TB 203 for service and maintenance of sprinkler installations, we've added a checklist as an annex to this technical bulletin. The checklist is on minimum service levels for sprinkler fire pumps and associated equipment. This has been a long-standing complaint that service provision did vary, quite significantly across providers. So what we've attempted to do here, with considerable assistance from VASA and their members, is put together a list of points of the absolute minimum things that must be addressed in all pump set servicing activities. So whilst it will vary from equipment to equipment, and people must always refer to the OEM's instructions and specifications, hopefully this will drive the level of provision upwards. Looking at TB 209 ESFRs. So the new BSEN introduces some new annexes, and Annex P attempts to deal with ESFR sprinkler protection. The slight problem is the material is fairly old. It's mostly the same as the published TB 209 2005 edition, so it is about 10 years old. TB 209 is subject to a major review at the moment, which is ongoing and should be released in the next couple of months and can just be inserted into the LPC rules. The issues really are that current best practice has moved on a bit. There's been some research undertaken in the last 10 years, which, similar to the point I was just talking about, shows that excessive sealing clearances are problematic for ESFR systems as well in certain circumstances. Some of the design solutions proposed by Annex P and TB 209 2005 are finding it difficult to get through some of the tests that have been run more recently. So in the new TB, we're going to address these issues. We're going to try and better align the water supply requirements to existing high hazard installations, and that's to allow systems to be of lower cost especially when it's a retrofit or a system alteration. And we'll be taking the usual steps to safeguard availability, reliability, and maintainability. For example, we'll be specifying a minimum of 2 tanks, 2 pump sets, and that limitations upon suction lift conditions should apply in the case of the ESFR protection. The SEN introduces a new annex, Annex N, which deals with control mode specific application sprinklers. In response, we've produced TB 235, and the CMSA approach may provide some useful solutions to problematic scenarios, but we consider what's written in the BSEN to be a pretty weak specification, and at this time we augment it through TB 235. This TB is quite short. It's largely cautionary and advisory, and highlighting some of the potential pitfalls of the approach to users. For example, the CMSA approach is very dependent on the type of head you would use and the approval limitations on that head, and the BSEN doesn't and can't deal with that, but nevertheless that's an important design issue that must be considered in the round. Okay, so this rather dense slide here, it's really intended to be a source of reference. It covers a few more of the technical bulletin changes that we've made, and you can take this away and hopefully find it useful when you're trying to make sense of your new editions of the rules. I'll just talk about a couple of the issues now. So in the LPC Rules instruction section, We have reinstated guidance about conventions and significance of text notes in tables, text notes, table notes, and normative and informative annexes. We've also updated the BSEN 12845 by overlaying new tabbing to the current set of technical bulletins. In TB 201, which deals with suitable sprinkler components and services, we've added a few new line items to the table in that technical bulletin. That's to bring check valves and non-return valves into approval schemes. This year we've stopped short of specifying which standard they should be approved to, but they are in the table. That's to flag the intention, and we would like to bring them properly within all the schemes. They're critical system components after all. I've just spoken about the pump set servicing and maintenance minimum requirements checklist. Elsewhere in TB 203, we've added commentary on recommendations on ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, which can be used to inspect a tank without sending a person into the tank or the need for draining it down. There's limitations to this approach, but it is nevertheless another useful inspection tool which might be helpful in some circumstances. And we've also added a few words on tank reconditioning and refurbishment work. I'll let you read the rest of those in your own time. Just jumping down to TB 214, sprinkler protection of flammable liquid stores. We've made some changes to head sensitivity requirements. Excuse me. Over the page on TB 216, sprinkler protection of aerosols. We have clarified one design point in relation to the design of in-rack protection. Specifically the uppermost level of in-rack heads being required in most cases where you go that route. Jumping down to TB 221, sprinkler protection of schools, we have clarified the scope, and that's to highlight that normally higher education and further education institutions, so schools and colleges, which tend to be bigger, more complex buildings, they were never really intended to be within the scope of this TB 221, so we've just added a few words to highlight that. TB 228, revision of BSEN 12845 Table 1. Well, CEN have actually corrected that Table 1, so this TB is no longer required. In TB 229, we have corrected the hazard classification of laundries. In TB 234, I've spoken about some of that, but note we've also corrected other errors throughout the document that were detected after its publication. And finally, we have also included in Part 3 of the LPC Rules supplementary guidance or added or updated on sprinkler and smoke fencing and Legionella. As I say, these two slides really are meant to be a source of reference to you. So the slides and the webinar will be made available to you shortly after we complete. So in conclusion, the LPC Rules for automatic sprinkler installations is a highly effective specification. Estimates of sprinkler system reliability are in the region of 92%, and that figure tracks back to NFPA 13 systems. And the estimate for corresponding UK systems, which in the main will be LPC Rules system, is approximately 98%. We aim to continue to provide a specification which provides first-rate levels of protection at reasonable system costs. Your ongoing support as contributors to and users of the standard is acknowledged, and special acknowledgement to BAFSA and the insurers, of course, who contributed significantly to this edition. Finally, on this slide, the telephone number and the email address by which you can purchase copies of the LPC Rules. I repeat the technical questions email address, technical@thefpa.co.uk. And to everyone who registered and attended this seminar, if you complete the feedback after the seminar concludes, which should open automatically, if you include your address, we will post you a free sprinkler design calculation tool. And finally, thank you for listening. Oh, Right, let's have a look at some of the Q&A. Okay, bear with me. Okay, question. Please provide a link to download the LPC rules. The LPC rules is a price publication from the FPA. You can obtain a copy by speaking to my colleagues on the telephone number 01608 812 524, or you can email sales@thefpa.co.uk. It's available in hard copy and PDF on a CD-ROM. Will slides be available to print at the end of the webinar? Yes, we will circulate the slides after the webinar to all attendees, and we will also make the recording of the webinar available as well. In respect of Clause 21, annual third-party inspection, is the requirement over and above the normal maintenance requirements specified by the sprinkler contractor? Well, we think it is because of the introduction of the wording third-party inspection, and we think what is being got at here is it should be someone independent from the maintenance provider who should be conducting this third-party review. And maintenance of systems is a common area of concern. We do get a lot of feedback about this. So in some senses, it would make sense if someone a bit removed from the normal provision of this maintenance was actually the person casting an eye over the system and offering up comments in the form of this audit report. I'm just scanning through the questions now, trying to find ones that I can answer at this time. With regard to tanks, can you point me to guidance on what constitutes an enclosed space as referenced by HSE? HSE do not define this. I think if it's a term that HSE are using, it would really be for them to comment definitively on what they actually mean. But we do have, I think it's a technical bulletin, but it might be supplementary guidance in Part 3. We do have a section dealing with underground tanks, and that touches on confined space issues. So I'm wondering if you might find some clarification in that technical bulletin. I can't be more specific on the spot now, but hopefully that's a useful pointer. Someone is asking about the increased density method of solving the high ceiling clearance issue. When we cross the 20 millimeter density threshold, do we need to increase the area to 200 from 260 square meters, 300 square meters? Good point. The BSEN doesn't deal with this question. We do deal with it in TB234 in the design tables where the issue is commented further on. I can't remember the actual answer off the top of my head, but I know we did think about it and did seek to address it. So hopefully that is covered for you. Does TB206 still not allow permitted exceptions in buildings over 30 metres high? In buildings over 30 metres high, the wish is that sprinkler protection is installed throughout the building. That's because consequences getting quite high in this sort of building, and for the sake of a bit of extra pipe work and a few extra heads, obviously there's going to be exceptions to that, but in most cases it is felt that the right thing to do is just sprinkler protect throughout the building. It's debated whether toilet blocks and central cores and fire escape stairs should be sprinkler protected, but on balance our opinion is that, acknowledging there's arguments for and against, but actually on balance the answer should be yes, they should be protected. Right. So there is always a debate when a design needs to include the LPC rules. Some people say that it's only when the insurer asks for it. Could you clarify this point? Well, I suppose really it's a matter of contract and what the authority wants. So the authority might in effect be the insurer, or it might be building control and building regulations. So what they say and what they want to achieve must be heeded. We consider BSEN 12845 does require supplementing by some of the additional requirements of the TBs in pretty much any case, really. So we would recommend that the LPC rules is the best document to follow in the majority of cases, but you must consult with, the stakeholders and the authorities in the particular case in point. Are there any plans to provide online electronic access to the LPC rules? Yes, there are plans. I don't know the details, but it's a common request, and we are looking into updating our offering in that regard. I certainly know it would be extremely useful. Provision on primary and secondary power supply. Views on secondary from the same substation in a different route. I can't answer the question, but I can say we have done further work in TB210, and that is on electrical supply issues. We've added a new schematic scenario. I'm not sure it would fully answer this question, but I think it will provide a bit more guidance on this issue. And if there are still details required, with feedback to us through the technical at the fba.co.uk email address, we'd be happy to take another look and try and work it up a bit further. Will TB203 still be free on the website with updates and when available? Yes, it will be freely available. TB203 needs to reach the maximum number of people, so we acknowledge it needs to be freely available and free of all the copyright restrictions, etc. So, yeah, we'll upload that. When will it be available? In the next few days, I would have thought. Yep, I'm getting a nod on that one. Bear with me. Some resistance to the increased density method being fed back from clients, cost increases. Yep. As I said, there's no silver bullet to this ceiling clearance issue. It's a really difficult problem to solve, particularly when you look at the test data and how systems perform in some circumstances. It's a big problem. We provided 3 options previously. We've provided a 4th now. Hopefully that helps, but it doesn't solve everything. We fully acknowledge that. Looking at the time now, we are at 45 minutes, so I think we'll draw proceedings to a close. Once again, thank you very much for attending and participating.